A wealthy widower walks into an upscale restaurant with his nonverbal daughter, expecting silence, obedience, and no surprises. But when his little girl begins to unravel in the middle of dinner, it's a black waitress named Cecilia Reimold who kneels beside her with an unexpected gentleness that no one, especially her father, sees coming. What starts as a moment of tension quickly becomes something much deeper, a quiet act of courage that stirs memories, cracks defenses, and challenges every assumption about class, race, and care. When compassion meets resistance in the most unlikely of places, who will be changed, and who will be brave enough to listen? Cecilia Reimold didn't need to look up to know something had shifted in the dining room. She felt it, the hush that fell like a dropped curtain, the breath that snagged in a guest's throat. But she kept folding napkins, placing them one by one into crisp triangles, a rhythm she'd mastered in years of working at Maison Del Mar. The kind of place where people like her were told to blend in, not belong. Then came the voice, sharp, male, unapologetically entitled. "Get that woman away from my daughter." Her spine stiffened, the napkin forgotten between her fingers. Heads turned, a waiter froze, silver tray teetering in his hands. A couple at table 4 leaned in with the slow glee of those starved for drama. And Cecilia, finally, turned. Table 10, in the corner reserved for the high-profitable, the high-paying, and the high-maintenance, a man stood with a presence as cold as the steel buttons on his blazer. Grant Westwood. She recognized him immediately, not from real life but from headlines. Real estate mogul, CEO of Westwood Capital, widower. The kind of man who rarely appeared without his name trailing a dollar sign. Across from him sat a girl, small, maybe 7, arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes shut as if the room were too bright, too loud, too much. Her plate of untouched risotto had begun to crust over, and her napkin lay in a heap on the floor. One shoe dangled from her foot, as if forgotten mid-fidget. Cecilia had only knelt beside her. No touch, no sudden movement, just a soft hello and a gentle, "Would it be okay if I sat here for a minute?" It was instinct, not protocol. But in that moment, she'd seen something familiar in the child's blank stare. A disconnection she'd once known in her own brother, back when doctors had no answers and the school sent notes home folded like apologies. "Sir," Cecilia said quietly, rising to her feet. "I'm sorry if I startled her. I noticed she seemed overwhelmed. Sometimes rhythm and softness." Grant cut her off with a glare sharp enough to shatter glass. "You people always think you know everything." Cecilia blinked, her breath caught halfway to her lips. She'd heard it before. Not always the words, but the tone. She could handle rudeness, but it was the way he said "you people," like peeling paint, revealing a layer underneath that was far more dangerous than arrogance. "I meant no disrespect," she said evenly. "I just saw she doesn't need your pity. And she definitely doesn't need some waitress pretending to understand her." She should have walked away. She should have nodded, apologized, disappeared like she'd been taught. But her eyes dropped to the girl again, and there it was. A twitch. Barely a flicker in the girl's hand, like a startled bird in flight. Then the faintest hum, soft and wavering, like a sound testing its way out of silence. Cecilia didn't move. Her hands, still at her sides, relaxed slightly. She let her voice match the girl's tone, nearly a whisper. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Cecilia." The girl, Lila, as the reservation had listed, opened her eyes. Only slightly, but enough to see her. "Don't," Grant warned, his voice now low and firm, his posture tight with control. "Step away, now." But Lila made a sound then. Not a word, but a breathy chuckle, fleeting, delicate, and wholly unexpected. Her hand reached slowly, almost shyly, for the small bread roll Cecilia had placed near her plate. Cecilia lowered herself to one knee again, her movements unthreatening. She tore the bread gently in half, exaggerated her motions like she was in a pantomime, then brought it close. "Like feeding a bird," she said softly. Lila took it, bit, chewed, swallowed, then looked up. Her lips parted. She said. One syllable, clear, innocent, fragile. And then Grant stepped back. It was subtle, just one step. But in a man like him, used to owning every room he entered, it was a seismic shift. His jaw tightened. His mouth moved, but no words came out. His eyes, glassy now, clung to Lila like she might vanish if he looked away. The silence in the dining room had changed. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was reverence. Cecilia stood slowly, not wanting to disturb the moment. She nodded once, respectfully, then turned to leave. But she didn't get far. "Wait," Grant said, voice softer now. How did you?" She stopped, looked back. "I've worked with children who communicate in different ways, rhythm, movement, quiet patterns. They don't always need talking, just not being ignored." He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language, one he'd never bothered to learn. The manager, Franklin Bell, appeared at her elbow then, summoned by some unseen disturbance in his sixth sense, for scandal. "Cecilia," he whispered harshly. "What are you doing? You can't just approach guests like that." "I wasn't trying to cause a problem," she replied calmly. "The little girl." "I saw the girl," Franklin said, plastering on a nervous smile as he looked over at Grant. "Mr. Westwood, please accept our deepest apologies. Cecilia will be spoken to." Grant didn't answer. His gaze was still fixed on his daughter, now quietly eating a second piece of bread with slow, practiced bites. "She spoke," he said, almost to himself. "She hasn't said a word since my wife died." Cecilia said nothing. Franklin tried again. "Perhaps we could comp your meal, Mr. Westwood? Move you to another table?" Grant looked at him, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. Then he shook his head. "No," he said, voice measured now. "We're finished here." He reached for Lila, who didn't protest when he lifted her gently into his arms. The girl's head rested on his shoulder. Something, Cecilia sensed, wasn't common, and her hand still clutched a piece of bread. Grant turned toward Cecilia one last time, paused as if to say something, then left without a word. The door closed behind them with a whisper, not a slam. Somehow, that made it feel louder. Franklin exhaled sharply and turned to Cecilia with fury in his eyes. "We're going to have a serious conversation about this," he hissed, before disappearing back toward the kitchen. Cecilia stood there alone in the now bustling room. The moment had passed, the hum of cutlery and conversation returning like an old habit. She returned to her station, picked up the napkins she'd been folding before everything changed, and started over. Crease, fold, triangle. But her hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Grant Westwood didn't speak on the drive home. The car, sleek and soundproofed like a bank vault, floated through the quiet streets of Harrington Ridge while the city outside bled gold and gray through the tinted windows. Lila leaned against his chest in the back seat, her breath warm on his collarbone, her fingers still holding the crumpled edge of that bread roll like it was something sacred. She hadn't made a sound on the way in, not a single word, not a glance toward the valet, not even a murmur when he'd guided her out of the restaurant in his arms, her head nestled in the crook of his neck. But now, nestled into him like she had as a toddler, she was humming. Soft, barely perceptible, but undeniably there. He didn't recognize the tune. It wasn't a lullaby he or Miriam had ever sung. It wasn't the melody from one of those expensive therapy apps he'd downloaded and never opened again. No, it was something else, something new, and that terrified him. When the car rolled to a smooth stop in front of the penthouse building, the driver exited without a word. Grant didn't wait for the door to be opened. He adjusted Leela gently, still in his arms, and stepped out himself. Inside the elevator, he stared at the mirrored wall. His own reflection looked back. Tailored suit slightly rumpled, hair in disarray, a smear of something dark, maybe sauce from the restaurant, on his cuff. But it wasn't the suit or the stain that bothered him. It was his eyes. They looked older than he remembered. At the top floor, the doors opened with a chime that echoed through the marble entryway of the penthouse. Lights flickered on automatically as he stepped in. Leela stirred. He paused, waiting to see if she'd say something, anything. But she didn't. She just slid out of his arms and walked barefoot across the foyer rug toward the window, where the city blinked like scattered stars. He followed her gaze. "You want to sit down?" he asked softly. She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. That counted for something. Grant stood there for a long moment, hands hanging uselessly at his sides before retreating to the kitchen. He needed something to do, something to slice or pour or throw. He opened the cabinet where Miriam used to keep the wine. Reds on the top shelf, whites chilled below. He grabbed the first bottle he saw, poured blindly into a glass, and stared at the splash of burgundy like it held answers. His mind reeled, replaying the moment again and again. The waitress. Cecilia Reimold, he remembered now. It had been printed on the corner of her apron. Had barely done anything. A whisper, a gesture, bread torn in two like a church offering, and Leela, his silent daughter, had responded. It wasn't just noise, it was recognition. And not just of the food or the rhythm. Of her. Grant leaned over the sink, staring at the empty glass. He hadn't realized he'd finished it. The sharpness in his chest returned, a sensation too familiar to be indigestion, the kind of pain that didn't come from the body, the kind that began the day Miriam died and never really left. He had tried, God, he had tried. Therapists, specialists, occupational playgroups with curated lighting and language-neutral toys. None of them had worked. Not for Lila. Not for him. Now he was just a man living in a fortress of glass and stone with a child he couldn't reach. Until tonight. He found Leela sitting cross-legged by the window, her forehead pressed gently against the glass. The sky had darkened, clouds rolling in like slow waves, heavy and patient. "Lila," he said quietly. She turned her head, just slightly. Her eyes met his. And for the first time in over a year, she didn't look through him. She looked at him. The following morning, Grant didn't go to the office. His assistant, Oliver, called 3 times. Grant ignored each one. He wasn't interested in murder details or stock fluctuations or why the board was irritated over his absence. He was sitting at the breakfast table with Lila, watching as she pressed her finger into a pat of butter and smeared it across toast in slow, careful swirls. The sound of her chewing was soft and rhythmic. Her eyes drifted between her plate and the sunlight spilling across the table. No outbursts, no flinches, no hiding beneath the oversized hoodie she wore most mornings. He poured her a second glass of juice. She didn't speak, but she reached for it on her own. That, too, felt like a miracle. At exactly noon, he got in the car. Maison Del Mar wasn't on his agenda. It hadn't been for years. But he found himself parking anyway, despite the strange look from the valet. He didn't make a reservation. Didn't care about protocol. He walked straight to the front desk. The host blinked in recognition. "Mr. Westwood, welcome back. Is everything all right?" "I'm looking for one of your staff," Grant said, voice even. "The woman who served me last night. Cecilia Reimold?" The host glanced toward the back. "She's not on shift until 4, sir." Grant paused. "Oh, wait." The man hesitated. "Would you prefer a private table?" "No," Grant said. "I'll wait out back." The host said nothing, but nodded. The alley behind the restaurant was quiet, the air thick with rosemary from the planters and the faintest hum of kitchen activity. Grant leaned against the brick wall, hands in his coat pockets, feeling out of place for the first time in years. At 4:10, she arrived. Same uniform, same tote bag slung over her shoulder, same steady gait, like she moved through life with purpose, even if no one else noticed. "Miss Reimold," he said. She stopped short, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You came back." "I did." There was no smile, no curiosity, just the weight of a woman who'd learned not to expect kindness from men like him. "I need to know," he said, "how you did it." She dropped her bag to the ground and leaned against the opposite wall. "I didn't do anything. I noticed a child in distress. I responded. Most people wouldn't have. Not most people." Grant exhaled. "You're not a therapist." "No, but I volunteered in sensory learning centers. Oakland, a couple years back. Kids with needs that don't fit neatly into file folders. Most of them don't need therapy. They need someone who doesn't look away." He didn't know what to say to that, and so he said nothing. After a moment, she added, "Your daughter, Leela, she's special. She's not broken. She's just reaching in ways most people don't recognize." Grant's jaw clenched. "I judged you, not for what you did, but for who you are. The moment I saw you, I assumed you didn't belong." She didn't flinch, just nodded. "I'm not proud of it," he added. "I'm not here for your guilt," Cecilia said plainly. "I'm not interested in becoming someone's redemption arc." Grant stared at the ground. "I don't need redemption." "Then why are you here?" He looked up. "Because last night my daughter spoke." Cecilia's eyes softened. He continued, quieter now. "I don't know what you did. I don't know how you knew. But I've been trying to reach her since my wife died, and she responded to you, just you." Cecilia stepped forward, slow and measured. "I didn't save her, Mr. Westwood. She reached for me. That's her strength, not mine." He nodded, feeling something swell in his chest, not quite grief, not quite hope. Something heavier, something that demanded more than money or power. "I want to understand her," he said. Cecilia didn't answer right away, just looked at him, as if weighing whether he meant it or just wanted to be told he wasn't the bad guy. Finally she said, "Then you're going to have to listen. Not to me, to her." And for once, Grant Westwood didn't argue. The boardroom at Westwood Capital was unusually quiet, without its usual centerpiece. Grant's leather chair, the one no one else dared to occupy, sat empty beneath the recessed lighting. The assistants, accustomed to his punctual 7:15 arrival, kept checking their watches, wondering if traffic had stolen their god. But Grant Westwood was not in a meeting. He was not on a conference call. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor of his daughter's room, holding a plush rabbit by its floppy ear while Lila lined up dominoes along the grain of the hardwood floor. She hadn't spoken since that moment in the restaurant, but her eyes met his more often now, and her fingers, once so hesitant, moved with delicate intention as she placed one tile down, then another, spacing them perfectly, as if each one held a secret. He didn't know what game she was playing, but she was playing. He dared not interrupt. On the bookshelf behind him sat framed photos of Miriam, smiling in a blue sundress with Lila on her hip, her hair tangled by the wind. Grant stared at that picture more often these days. Not out of nostalgia, that phase had passed years ago, but out of something closer to penance. "I don't know how to do this without you," he whispered once, when Lila was asleep. He still didn't. But maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone who did. Later that afternoon, Grant stood on the balcony, cell phone in hand, the city sprawling out below like a puzzle he no longer had the energy to solve. He didn't remember dialing Oliver, but the man's familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "You've been unreachable, sir. The Singapore merger has stalled. Legal is concerned." "I'm taking a week," Grant said flatly. "A week?" Oliver stuttered. "Sir, respectfully, that's not like you." "Sounds like you." "I'm aware. What should I tell the board?" "Tell them my daughter said her first word in over a year." There was a long pause on the line. Grant didn't wait for a reply. He ended the call and turned toward the skyline, the weight in his chest both lighter and heavier than it had been in a long time. That evening, as twilight draped itself across the city like a shawl, Grant sat in the living room with Lila beside him on the couch, watching as she traced patterns into the cushions with her fingertip. Her head rested on his sleeve. She didn't make a sound, but the calm in her posture said more than any word ever could. His laptop lay open on the coffee table, untouched. Dozens of unread emails blinked from the corner of the screen, begging for attention. He ignored them. Instead, he watched Lila's finger loop and swirl, loop and swirl. When she finally fell asleep with her legs tucked under her and one hand still in motion, Grant gently shifted away, covered her with the soft quilt Miriam's sister had made, and returned to the kitchen. His thoughts were louder there. He didn't like being uncertain. He'd built empires on certainty, precision, measurable results. But what Cecilia had sparked in his daughter, no, revealed, couldn't be boxed into any metric. It wasn't data. It was something older, something raw. He wanted to see her again. No, he needed to. So the next day, at 3:55 p.m., Grant sat once again in the alley behind Maison Del Mar, just as he had before. Only this time, he brought 2 coffees in hand. Cecilia arrived right on time. She wore the same pressed uniform, the same quiet focus in her expression. But her steps slowed when she saw him there. "You really don't like being told no, do you?" she said, accepting the coffee without asking. "It's not about no, it's about not understanding." Cecilia took a sip, then leaned against the wall opposite him. "I can't fix her, Mr. Westwood." "I know that. I'm not asking you to." "Then why are you here?" He hesitated. "Because I've spent a year trying to help her, with everything money can buy, and none of it mattered until you knelt on that carpet and hummed a tune I'd never heard." Cecilia looked away, watching a waiter slide trash into a back dumpster. "I used to help run a music and movement program for neurodiverse kids. A lot of them didn't speak, but they responded to patterns, rhythm, soft repetition. It wasn't therapy. It was presence." "You were brilliant with her," he said. "I was seeing." That made him pause. She looked back at him. "People like me? Black women in aprons? We don't get credit. We get corrected. We don't get asked why we do something. We get told how not to." "I was wrong about you," Grant admitted. "That's not enough." "I know." Cecilia finished her coffee and tossed the empty cup into a nearby bin. "So what are you looking for now?" "A bridge." "Things to her?" He nodded. Cecilia tilted her head, studying him. "You want help?" "Yes." "Then it has to be on her terms, not yours. No control, no expectations, just presence. You okay with that?" He swallowed. I'm learning. Good, she said, standing straighter. Because she's been trying to speak in ways you've never listened for. I just got lucky enough to be quiet long enough to hear it. She stepped back toward the door. Do you think she'll want to see me again? He asked. Cecilia paused. I think she already does. Grant didn't go back to the office the next day either. Instead, he cleared the sunroom at home, removed the bulky furniture, and rolled out a soft mat across the hardwood. He dimmed the lights, turned off the TV, opened the windows just enough to let the breeze stir the curtains like breath. When Cecilia arrived that afternoon, after he'd texted her, humbly, awkwardly, asking if she might come by, Lila was already seated on the mat, two stuffed animals in front of her, facing each other. Cecilia entered slowly, no big greetings, no pressure. She lowered herself to the floor beside the girl and began humming. Grant watched from the kitchen, unseen. Lila looked at Cecilia, then at the animals, then back. She picked up one and made a quiet sound. Cecilia nodded, mimicked the sound, and gently tapped the toy's nose. Grant blinked back the sting in his eyes. It was happening again. No drama, no miracle. Just presence. Just listening. The quiet spark in the silence. The hum of the restaurant was different now. Cecilia noticed it the moment she stepped through the service entrance of Maison Del Mar, her tote bag heavy on her shoulder, her hair pulled into the same efficient twist she wore every shift. The kitchen's usual clatter sounded the same. Knives tapping against cutting boards, the low roar of burners, the steamers hissing with impatience. But there was a current of tension threaded beneath it, like a warning. Franklin Bell was waiting for her. His arms were crossed, his posture stiff, as if he'd been standing still for too long. You've been seeing him, he said before she could even clock in. Cecilia set her bag down gently. Good afternoon, Franklin. Don't play polite with me. I'm talking about Grant Westwood. He's been back here twice asking for you, once out back, and now I hear you've been to his home. She didn't confirm it, didn't deny it either. Franklin stepped closer, lowering his voice. I don't care what kind of attention he's throwing your way. That man is dangerous. He's not dangerous, Cecilia said calmly. He's a father trying to understand his daughter. Franklin scoffed. He's a billionaire, Cecilia. They don't do things for nothing. You think he really sees you, or is this just another man who thinks a little gratitude buys him your time? Her mouth twitched, but she didn't react. You're not paid to be his therapist, Franklin added. You work for me. And if you're going to turn this place into some charity extension, I need to know whether you still want this job. Cecilia's jaw tightened. You think helping a child is charity? I think it's a liability. She stared at him for a long moment, not angry, just exhausted. I've worked doubles. I've trained your rookies. I've handled every table you give me without complaint. And the first time someone sees me doing something human, you threaten me with my paycheck? Franklin didn't answer. He straightened his cuffs, smoothed down his tie. I'm reminding you what your job is. No, Franklin. You're reminding me what I'm not, to you. She didn't wait for permission. She walked past him into the kitchen, the heat washing over her like armor. That night, Cecilia worked like she always did, steady, focused, efficient, but inside, something had shifted. She'd grown used to being underestimated, but not to being told that her presence, her care, was a liability. By the time she arrived at Grant's penthouse the next afternoon, her chest felt knotted. But Lila was waiting, sitting by the sunroom window, her small fingers drumming out a quiet rhythm on the sill. Hey there, sunshine, Cecilia said gently. Lila turned, just her head, but her eyes lit up. That was enough. They played the same way they had before, soft, unstructured. Cecilia let Lila lead, through toys, through silence, through gestures. Grant watched from a distance, seated on the edge of the room, notebook in hand. Not to work, to learn. She doesn't like sudden movements. Cecilia noted. "Watch how she stiffens when the curtain snaps from the breeze." He nodded, scribbled something down. "She's sensitive to textures, too. That mat? Too rough? She's tolerating it, but notice how she keeps shifting her legs off it? She's adapting, but she's uncomfortable." Grant blinked. "I hadn't noticed. She adapts a lot. That's what children like her do, and because they do it quietly, people assume they're fine." He looked at Lila. "I haven't known how to help." "You've been trying too hard to fix," Cecilia said gently. "But she doesn't need fixing, she needs understanding." There was a pause. Not tense, just real. Then he said, "You're the first person who said that to me." "She's the one who told me." Later that evening, Grant asked if Cecilia could stay for dinner. She hesitated, the warning from Franklin still echoing in her mind, but nodded. Lila had shown more verbal signs today than ever before. A single syllable, a faint echo of the word blue, while pointing to her socks. It would be wrong to leave now. Dinner was quiet but comfortable. Grant made pasta, simple and clumsy in execution. Cecilia offered to help, but he shook his head. "I need to do this." Lila ate slowly, methodically, her eyes flicking between her father and Cecilia like watching tennis. Then, halfway through the meal, she reached for Cecilia's hand, just placed her small palm against the back of it, and rested it there. Grant saw it, and this time, he didn't look shocked. He looked grateful. After dessert, blueberries and cream, Cecilia gathered her things, sensing the evening winding down. At the door, Grant hesitated. "Thank you," he said, "for not just helping her, but helping me." Cecilia adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "You're doing more than you think." He took a breath, unsure if he should say the next part, but he did anyway. "You make her feel safe. That's not a small thing." Cecilia offered a small smile. "Neither is listening." She stepped into the hallway, and the door closed behind her. The next morning, back at Maison Del Mar, Franklin didn't say a word to her. Not because he'd changed his mind, but because he'd already sent a formal report to management questioning her boundaries with guests. Word was spreading. Some servers murmured about favoritism. Others defended her. But Cecilia didn't explain herself. She didn't ask for permission to care. Instead, she did her job with even more grace. That afternoon, she received a text. "Are you free this weekend? I want to learn more about the music methods you mentioned." Lila's responding again. "Grant." She stared at the message, heart tight in her chest, and then typed, "I'm free Saturday, but remember, you won't lead this. She will." The reply came almost instantly. "Understood. I'm learning." And he was. Because real listening wasn't just about hearing the words. It was about watching the hands that didn't wave, hearing the hums that filled the quiet, and respecting the silence that often carried the loudest truths. Cecilia knew that. Lila was showing it. And now, finally, Grant was beginning to understand. Maison Del Mar gleamed under its chandeliered ceilings, each table dressed with white linen and polished silver. But beneath the shine, a quiet storm was brewing. Cecilia felt it before she even entered the dining room. Something in the way Franklin's eyes followed her from the host stand to the server's station. Something in how her name slipped into whispers between co-workers, not with malice but with tension, like a rumor that no one dared speak aloud. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. It wasn't just that Grant Westwood had returned 3 times in 1 week and asked for her each time. It wasn't just that his daughter now lit up when Cecilia arrived, or that the girl had begun offering one-word replies. Blue, milk, more. Only when Cecilia was near. It was that everyone was watching. And in this place, being seen too clearly was dangerous. "You're wanted in the office," said one of the newer servers, a wiry kid named Devon with nervous eyes. Franklin said now. Cecilia wiped her hands on a towel, handed off her section to Delaney, her one ally on staff, and headed to the back. Franklin was waiting behind the desk with his arms crossed, a paper in his hand and the kind of smile people wore before delivering news that wasn't news at all. The assistant manager, Teresa, stood in the corner, arms folded tight, her mouth a thin, anxious line. "Cecilia," Franklin said with the air of false cordiality. "Take a seat." "I'll stand," she replied. He nodded slowly, tapping the paper against the edge of the desk. "We received a complaint," he began. "A guest this afternoon said you were, and I'm quoting directly, overly familiar, distracting, and unprofessional." Cecilia raised an eyebrow. "With who?" "A couple at table 12. You were seen laughing and kneeling beside a child who wasn't seated at your table." "Again!" Her expression didn't change. "That child was Lila Westwood. Her father requested I assist. She was mid-meltdown." Franklin sighed like he'd practiced it. "This is a restaurant, not a therapy center. I've warned you before, and now guests are beginning to notice. This place thrives on decorum." Cecilia's voice stayed calm. "And what about the guests who saw a child being soothed instead of shamed? What about the ones who left bigger tips after watching someone show compassion?" "We're not in the business of optics," he replied, frowning. "We're in the business of service." Teresa opened her mouth as if to speak, but said nothing. Cecilia glanced at her, then back at Franklin. "You're not firing me." "I'm giving you a final written warning," he said, tapping the paper on the desk. "One more complaint, and I'll have no choice." "No choice," she repeated. "Because a man with a daughter on the spectrum keeps coming here, asking for someone who actually sees her, and your biggest concern is decorum." Franklin stepped forward. "Don't push this." She looked him square in the eyes. "You're not upset about policy. You're upset because someone with power sees value in someone like me. And it's not supposed to work that way, is it?" He didn't answer. She turned to leave. "You can keep your warning. Frame it if you want. I'm not apologizing for helping that girl." That night, as she walked out the back alley exit, the cool air stung her cheeks. Her phone buzzed. "We're trying a new activity tomorrow. Colored light panels." She's excited. "You'll be here?" Cecilia stared at the screen. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from the ache of decision. "Yes, I'll be there." Saturday arrived quietly. No fanfare, no rush, just a steady pulse of purpose as Cecilia rang the doorbell to the Westwood penthouse. Grant answered in a t-shirt and jeans, his hair still damp from a shower, a nervous smile tugging at his mouth. "Come in," he said. "She's been waiting." Leela was already sitting on the floor of the sunroom, hands outstretched toward the panels of soft, glowing color Grant had placed along the windowed wall. She tapped each one gently. Red, blue, green, then back again. When she saw Cecilia, she made a small sound, a note of welcome that had no word but all the warmth in the world. Cecilia sat beside her. No rush, no questions, just quiet presence. "She's been touching each color and saying part of the word," Grant said from behind them. "Just syllables, but clear, intentional." "She's inviting you in," Cecilia whispered. "One syllable at a time." An hour passed in rhythm and play. Grant joined them, mimicking Lila's motions, his tone careful, measured. When she tapped blue, he did too. When she hummed, he hummed back. And when she reached for his hand, he held it. Later, over lunch, Cecilia sat across from him at the kitchen island while Lila quietly colored in the next room. "I might lose my job," she said. Grant looked up sharply. "Because of me?" "Because of people like Franklin. Because caring too much in a place that only rewards surface-level charm is apparently a risk." He set down his fork. "I'm sorry." "I am not asking for an apology," she said. "I'm telling you that this matters more." He studied her then. not like an investor weighing a deal, but like a man realizing he'd underestimated something that couldn't be priced. "I want to offer you something," he said finally. "A role with us." Cecilia blinked. "What kind of role?" "Whatever form you need. As Lila's companion. Educator. Guide. Part-time, full-time, I don't know the label. But I'll cover it. Salary, benefit, structure. You set the boundaries. Just help me build something around her that sees her like you do." She hesitated, not because she doubted the sincerity, but because no one had ever said something like that without strings. "What if I say yes?" she asked, and she stops responding one day. "What if I fail her?" Grant shook his head. "You've already done more than anyone else ever has. You don't owe us perfection, just your presence." Cecilia looked down at her hands, then out toward the sunroom, where Lila had just placed a blue crayon in the center of the paper and whispered, "Sky." She smiled. "Okay, let's build something." And for the first time, Grant didn't feel like he was losing control. He felt like he was finally choosing the right thing, not with power, but with trust. The mornings came differently now. Not with alarm clocks and business calls, not with the hollow footsteps of a man pacing a penthouse in silence, but with the gentle rise of Lila's voice. Not full words, not yet, but sounds that had meaning. Cecilia heard them each day as she stepped into the Westwood home. A whisper of, a whisper of la la, sometimes just breath shaped by hope, but they were hers, and they were music. Cecilia had been working with Lila for a month now, no longer an unofficial guest, no longer sneaking kindness past the guardrails of restaurant policy. She was now woven into the fabric of this family. Grant made it official in the way he did everything, with quiet resolve and full sincerity. The contract had arrived, with her name spelled correctly in bold lettering, and more importantly, the terms were hers. No fine print, no hidden expectations. He'd simply written, "Help her be herself, that's the job." Cecilia hadn't cried when she signed it. She waited until she got home. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, hands trembling, thinking of every time someone had called her just a waitress, every time she'd been told to stay in her lane. And now, here she was, teaching a billionaire's daughter not how to speak, but how to be heard. On a Thursday morning, she arrived to find the sunroom transformed. Grant had added shelves with sensory-friendly materials, weighted blankets, soft fabrics, color-coded puzzles. There was a reading nook with beanbags and dimmable lights, and in one corner a small table with 2 chairs, one adult-sized. "You did all this?" she asked, setting her bag down. Grant appeared behind her, his sleeves rolled up. "Lila picked the colors, I just followed orders." Lila shuffled into the room then, holding her favorite stuffed rabbit by one ear. She looked up at Cecilia and grinned, a full, toothy smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Cece," she said softly. Cecilia's breath caught. "Did you?" Grant stepped closer, his voice thick. "She's been practicing. That's the 3rd time she's said your name." Cecilia knelt down, arms open but not imposing. "That's me, sweetheart. Cece." Lila nodded once and placed the rabbit in Cecilia's lap. They played for an hour that morning, not just with toys, but with expressions. Lila was exploring now, not just existing. She tested tones, touched textures, pointed to things, and waited for names. Grant watched from the doorway, sipping coffee with the patience of a man learning a new language. At noon, Grant surprised them both by suggesting lunch at Maison Del Mar. Cecilia's eyebrows lifted. "Back to the scene of the crime?" He chuckled. "We'll take a booth, quiet corner. You'll be our guest, not our server." She hesitated. "You think she's ready?" "She's more ready than I am." So they went. The maitre d' did a double take when they arrived, not because of who Grant was, but because of who he was with. Lila walked in between them, holding one hand in each of theirs. She wore soft blue headphones to soften the noise, and her backpack had a small patch that read, "Please be patient, I'm learning." They were seated discreetly near a window, away from the bustle. A few diners whispered when they recognized Grant, but most looked away once they saw the child, not with disdain but confusion. They didn't understand what they were seeing. What they would. Lila reached for her cup without prompting. Cecilia passed her a straw. Grant unfolded the menu and began pointing to options, letting her eyes guide the decision. She tapped the soup. He nodded. Progress. Their waiter arrived, and Cecilia recognized him. Devon, the new server who'd once passed her Franklin's warning. He stiffened at first, unsure of what to say. "Hi, Devon," Cecilia offered kindly. His shoulders eased. "Hey, you look good." "This is Lila," she said gently. He smiled down at the girl. "Hi, Lila." She looked up, blinked twice, and whispered, "Hi." Devon's face lit up. "Wow, it's nice to meet you." He took their order and returned moments later with soup and bread. Lila reached for the roll, tore it in half, and handed one piece to Cecilia, just as Cecilia had done for her weeks ago. Grant noticed. So did the couple seated 2 tables away, the same ones who had once complained. The woman leaned toward her partner. "That's the little girl," she whispered. "The one who—" But this time, she didn't sound irritated. She sounded moved. The man nodded. "She looks happy." Lila made it through the entire meal without a meltdown. She even said, "Thank you," a soft, careful phrase directed at Devon. The boy looked like he might cry. When the check came, Grant slid his card inside and handed it off with a smile. "Keep the change," he said. "And thank you for the kindness." Devon nodded. "Any time." As they left, the manager, not Franklin, who had since moved on to another location, approached with a tentative smile. "Miss Reimold," she said, "we'd love to have you back. As a guest, of course." Cecilia smiled, her hand resting lightly on Lila's shoulder. "Maybe, one day." They exited into the afternoon sun, the city alive around them, the air fresh with spring. Grant crouched beside Lila, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did amazing, Bug." Lila looked at him and whispered, "More soup." He laughed. "You got it." They walked home, slowly, hand in hand, like a family. At the penthouse, as Lila colored at her table, Grant turned to Cecilia. "I never thought I'd see her like this. I never thought I'd see her at all." Cecilia folded her hands. "She's always been there. She just needed space to be her." "I was scared," he admitted. "I thought if I didn't fix her, I'd lose what was left of Miriam." Cecilia met his gaze. "But you didn't lose her. You found Lila." He nodded. "And," she added, voice softening, "you let her find herself." That evening, as twilight settled over the city, Grant set the table for 3. No housekeepers, no caterers, just simple plates, juice boxes, and a bowl of Lila's favorite pasta with extra cheese. Cecilia sat at one end, Lila in the middle, and Grant at the other. As they ate, Lila laughed, all a whisper, a full, bright, uninhibited laugh that filled the room like sunlight. Grant closed his eyes for just a second, the sound wrapping around him like a lullaby. Cecilia smiled. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was the beginning of something better. And as they sat together around the table, not as billionaire and waitress, but as father, daughter, and the woman who helped them bridge the gap, there was only one truth left to hold on to. The heart, when listened to, always finds its way home.